of Daniel's 70th weeks, which we're going to get into more details of that. So, but let's first, before we move on, we need to understand why prophecy is so important. Prophecy is a unique characteristic of God. What God does in prophecy, he tells us the end from the beginning. The end from the beginning. What does that mean? So if I'm able to tell you what's going to happen tomorrow, you might say, I guessed. But if I could tell you what happens 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, 100 years, 1,000 years in the future, okay, you're going to say, well, you can't, no one can really do that. Well, what prophecy is, that's exactly what God does. God reveals the end from the beginning. In other words, he's talking to, and we're going to talk about Daniel. Daniel's a book of prophecy in the Bible. And Daniel tells us at this point what's going to happen in the future, thousands of years in the future. And so that's unique because God has a control over time. God is not limited by time. You and I are limited by time. We could guess what's going to happen today or what's going to happen at the end of the day, and we can look back at what happened yesterday. But do we really know what's going to happen tomorrow? I mean, if you knew what was going to happen tomorrow, you could be a quadrillionaire because all you have to do is just recently, you saw the huge gyrations in the stock market, throwing people off. One day it's up 1,000 points, one day it's down 1,000 points. If you knew the exact pattern of what was going to happen and you made the right investments, you knew what stocks did buy, I mean, you would be doubling, tripling, making your money 10 times each day, okay? But you and I don't have that ability. We don't have the power to know the future. That's not part of our nature, but it's part of God's nature. And God reveals that nature through prophecy. God tells prophets such as Daniel, such as David, such as Jeremiah, Ezekiel, what's going to happen in the future. And he spells out the details in exact detail. So the uniqueness of the 70 weeks of Daniel is God's going to give us the exact month, year, and day that Jesus is going to be killed. And he's going to tell us the future after that. So we're going to talk more about that in a second. But let's look at Isaiah chapter 46, verses 9 and 10. Here we see God declaring the uniqueness of his character. So in Isaiah 46, verses 9 and 10, it says, "Remember the former things of old, for I am God, and there is no other. I am God, there's none like me, declaring the end from the beginning, and from ancient times, things that are not yet done, saying, my counsel shall stand, and I will do all my pleasure." Now, look at that verse. It says, I am God, there is none like me. And what does that mean? He goes, declaring the end from the beginning. So what God is doing, he's telling us what's going to happen at the end from the beginning. That's what Bible prophecy is. It's a unique characteristic of God. And he goes, from ancient times, things that are not yet done. And so this is what we're going to see in the book of Daniel. Let me give you an example, okay? If, for example, you can buy a lottery ticket and you knew what the end was, then you could have millions of dollars, hundreds of millions of dollars by knowing the lottery ticket. So you might ask yourself the question, why should I trust the Bible? Okay. Well, think about it this way. If the Bible is correct on future world events, that means if the Bible can tell us what's going to happen thousands of years in the future, then it's logical to trust what it's going to say about eternity. Think about where are you going to spend eternity? Are you an eternal being? Are you a temporary being? Are you like an animal? You're just going to die, you're going to cease to exist? Or are you a person that's going to live forever and ever and ever? And if you're a person that's lived for forever and ever, how do you know what the Bible says is true? What kind of evidence do you have that the Bible said is true? If, for example, you were on a court trial, and in the court, they would ask for evidence. They would say, what's the evidence for your innocence or for your guilt? And so the prosecutor would present evidence, you would present evidence why you're innocent, the prosecutor would present evidence why you're guilty, and the judge makes a judgment. So in the same way, the world kind of like looks at the Bible, looks at God, and they're like, I don't believe the Bible, I don't believe God, or I do believe the Bible, I do believe God. I'll tell you personally, for my own sake, my own personal experience, I didn't really believe the Bible. I doubted the Bible. And I went around asking people, what kind of evidence do you have that the Bible's true? And it wasn't until I was in a library And I really asked God this question, like, how do I know, like, what's going to happen after I die? And I remember walking through that library. And this is part of my own personal testimony. I remember walking through that library, and I remember looking at all the bookshelves, and just like yesterday, I can remember that day. And I remember looking at all the bookshelves and saying to myself, if I could only read all these books, then I would know what truth is. I would understand what truth is. And I would come to this library, spend 2 or 3 hours a day just wandering the shelves looking for truth, looking for evidence. But then one day I pulled out from the shelf the book of Daniel, and I started reading this commentary on the book of Daniel. And I got to Daniel chapter 9, and I remember reading about the 70 weeks of Daniel, which I'm going to share with you today. And I remember being utterly blown away by the evidence. The evidence blew me away. And I said to myself, how can I deny this? I couldn't deny this anymore. So that's the day that I can really say my faith was affirmed with solid evidence that even if I didn't want to believe, I didn't have a choice because I saw the evidence. And so if the Bible's accurate on that, then it's also accurate on where am I going to go for eternity. If I'm an eternal being, am I going to heaven or hell? So my job from that point on was to understand the Bible and to help other people understand the Bible. My life was changed at that point. And just to kind of put it in practical terms, okay? Think about it this way. In the same way that you use a pen and you might write your name, Joe, Jim, okay, with a pen, okay? God uses a prophet, okay? And these prophets are the pen in the hand of God. And through these prophets, God wrote the books. Think of the book of Daniel as no more than a pen in the hand of God. Like Daniel's a pen, Isaiah's a pen, Jeremiah's a pen, Paul was a pen. And so Daniel's a book written under God's inspiration. God spoke through the prophet Daniel, writing his words down. So God gives us and transmits his words to us so we can understand his plan, his purposes, and what's going to happen in the future.